right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Racha Kodesh. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. Here today, I'm just going to go into the book of Ezekiel, all right, chapter 17, all right, going into the parable of the eagle and the vine, all right, which, the Lord, put into the mouth of Ezekiel to say, all right, which, when you go into it, this parable is, like many other scriptures, all right, there's certain verses in here that are twofold, all right, because you have certain scriptures that are, both historical, all right, meaning they happened in history, but they're also prophetic, all right. So when you go into the book of Jeremiah, for example, or the book of Isaiah or Amos or Hosea, there's certain verses in there that you'll hear them saying, and it did actually happen. Historically, it was accurate, it happened, but those verses are also, referring on to prophecy. Those verses are also referring onto what's going to happen in the future, all right. And so, as we go through the chapter, there's certain verses that I'll let you know, all right, that are either twofold or it actually happened historically, and then, it's also prophetic at the same time, all right, which this is why, all right, pursuing, matter of fact, before I start, let me go here real quick. All right, this is Amos chapter 3, verse 7. It says, surely the Lord God will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants, the prophets. All right, so this is why, all right, these scholars, some of them, they might get the historical part of it, but they won't get, the prophetic, all right, scriptures, because prophecy, all right, understanding prophecy is the actual spirit. It's not just studying history. It's an actual spirit that the Lord bestows upon you, because the scriptures tell you that what? It is the spirit of Yahweh Shai. The testimony of Yahweh Shai is the spirit of prophecy. All right, so we're going to start. This is the book of Ezekiel, chapter 17, all right, verse 1. It says, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, put forth a riddle, and speak a parable unto the house of Israel. All right, so we know that right here, all right, that what we're about to read is what? It's a parable. That means it's going to be, Ezekiel's going to be using parabolic talk. He's going to say one thing, but it really represents something else. All right. Verse 3 says, and say, thus saith the Lord power, a great eagle with great wings, long-winged, full of feathers, which had diverse colors, came onto Lebanon and took the highest branch of the cedar. All right, now that eagle, okay, which, we should already know is referring on to Esau. All right, Esau, Edom. All right, Esau, Edom, which that's his symbol. Now, when you go into the book of Deuteronomy, the Lord said that what? I will send a nation, all right, against you as swift as the eagle flieth, all right, whose tongue thou shalt not understand, neither will they show favor to the old or the young. All right, so in verse 3, the eagle that has great wings, long wing, full of feathers, is ultimately representing Esau. All right, now it says, he came onto Lebanon and took the highest branch of the cedar, and the highest branch of the cedar is Israel. All right, once again, when you read in verse 2, it tells you that this is what? A parable. So it's one thing representing another. Now, when you all right, to prove that, you can use trees, all right, or plants to represent Israel, let's go to the book of Jeremiah or Isaiah. This is Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 2. It says, I have likened the daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman. Salaki, I just read the completely wrong thing. I think it's actually in the book of Isaiah. Let me get that real quick. Going into, let me see. It might be Isaiah 6 and 2, where the Lord talks about, no, I know it's in Jeremiah. It has to be in Jeremiah. The Lord basically talks about us being that the trees or the garden or the planting, all right, of the Lord. It goes something along the lines of Judah, my pleasant plant. All right, it's escaping me, but I keep feeling like it's in Jeremiah, the 6th chapter. But anyway, you know, you could word search it. If a brother finds it or comes across it, you could just put it in the comment section for me. But you know, I often get these scriptures mixed up with these particular verses. All right, but or maybe it's 5 and 7. Let me see. Let's check Isaiah 5. Now it's on my mind, so I gotta find it. Salakia, just give me 1 second. There we go. This is Isaiah chapter 5, verse 7. It says, "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant." All right. And he looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry. So, like right there is an example. Now we're actual human beings. We're not literal. We're not a literal vineyard, but it's a metaphor. It's likening us onto that. Okay, so it's the same thing here in Ezekiel the 17th chapter, that the highest branch of the cedar is representing the nation of Israel. Verse 4 says he cropped off the top of his young twigs and carried it into a land of traffic. He set it in a city of merchants. Okay, now that land of traffic is talking about America. Okay, because when we see the word traffic, you know, instantly we think of cars packed up on a highway, people blowing the horns and so on and so forth. But when you actually look up the word traffic, it means commerce, trade, business. Okay, and that's this land, America, right here. Now it also calls it what? The city of merchants. Okay, that's why you go down to Wall Street and you have the New York Stock Exchange. All right, you have something called the World Trade Center. Okay, because a lot of the reasons also that these other nations put up with the BS of America or Babylon is because of what? The trade deals. All right, because you have a lot of heavy consumers here in America, so those merchants or those other countries and companies and businesses come here to make a profit. Now, when you go, all right, we're going to go to the book of Revelation to prove that. All right, Revelation chapter 18. All right, we're going to start at verse, let's start at verse 8. Okay, it says, "Therefore shall her plagues come in one day." Now, who's the herd? The herd is Babylon, all right, which we know today as America. So it says, "Shall her plagues come in one day, death, mourning, and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord power who judgeth her." And that fire is going to come from both the thermonuclear missiles, all right, the ballistic missiles from these other nations, but also from the laser beams from the chariots of the Lord and the angels. All right. So it says, verse 9, "And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her, for they shall see the smoke of her burning." Verse 10, "Standing afar off for for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is her judgment come, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore." So that means that what? They used to come here to sell their merchandise. That's why it's called the city of merchants. And that's why they're going to mourn upon America's destruction, because they're going to basically lose business. Now, when you jump down to verse 15, it mentions the merchants again. It says, "The merchants of these things which were made rich by her." Okay? By who? By Babylon. It says, "Shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing." All right, so going back to the book of Ezekiel 17, it says that he cropped off the top of his young twigs and carried it into a land of traffic. He set it in a city of merchants. That was America. All right, they brought us here to America. Now it says he also, and this is prophetic. All right, now it's historical now because it happened to us. All right, but at the time of Ezekiel saying this was prophetic. So it says he also took of the seed of the land and planted it in a fruitful field. The seed of the land is also referring on to Israel, but the fruitful field is talking about America. Because right now, when you look at America, trees are dead, everything is drained, and the life is sucked out of it. But when you go back to the way it was before Esau came here, all right, it was a fruitful field. It was like a tropical forest, all right? Before the Northern Kingdom came here, and really even when they were here, all right, it was a fruitful field. and it had a lot of resources, a lot of exotic animals. Okay, and that's why King Solomon, all right, would have his navy. They used to come over here to the Americas with Hiram, all right, and they used to come over here to to import, to bring things from here back into the land of Israel. I believe that's First Kings. I have it here. Um, First Kings chapter 10, verse 23. All right. I'll start at verse 22. It says, for the king, I'll start at 21. It says, and all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was nothing accounted for in the days of Solomon. Verse 22, for the king had had at sea a navy of Tarshish, all right, with the navy of Hiram. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Okay, and why does it say once in 3 years? Because when you go into the book of Second Esdras, let's get that real quick. It tells you how long it takes, or it took them to get to the Americas. Okay, Second Esdras chapter 13, we're gonna go right around verse 44. All right, and this goes into when the 10 tribes left the east and they came here to America. It was called what? Asareth, which Asareth, when you break it down into Hebrew, it means another land. All right, I can't remember the Hebrew exactly, but it's 2 words. I believe it's Asherah, Arataza. All right, which is where you get Ashereth, which means another land. Okay, so it says here, verse 44, for the Most High then showed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half. And the same region is called Arsareth. Okay, so that area, which is America, all right, but here is referred to as Arsareth. It said it took them what, a year and a half. So when you go back to Second Kings, it makes sense that it said that every 3 years they would bring the ships would bring the peacocks and all the different resources, because if it takes a year and a half, 1.5 years to go, 1.5 years to go, and 1.5 years to come back, that's a total of 3 years. So once in every 3 years, they would bring those resources. All right, because what, this place was fruitful. So going back to Ezekiel 17 and 5, it says he took also of the seed of the land and planted it in a fruitful field, which is America. He placed it by great waters and set it as a willow tree. And it grew and became a spreading vine of low stature. Once again, that spreading vine of low stature was us, because we were brought to America, okay, and we grew, but we're still on the bottom. All right, we as a nation here are of a low stature, okay, and that's a part of the curses that the Lord put on us. All right, when you go to Deuteronomy 28, verse 43, it says, the stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. Okay, going back to Ezekiel, what? That low stature. All right, so we were put here and we grew, but what? We became of low stature. All right, meaning on the bottom. It says that he was going to be the head and we were going to be the tail. All right, so continuing, it says, whose branches turned toward him, and the roots thereof were under him. So it became a vine and brought forth branches and shot forth sprigs. Now the branches and sprigs represent our offspring or our children. Because when you go into let's go into it real quick. The book of Genesis, all right, chapter 49. The word branches, all right, or boughs, all right, is likened, or it actually means children. All right, when you go to Genesis 49, starting at verse 22, it says, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. Now, when you go into the Hebrew of the word bow, it goes back to the Hebrew word ban, which means son. And when you go into the Hebrew word or the Hebrew of branches, it goes to the Hebrew word bath, which means daughter. Okay? So sons and daughters. So when you go back to Ezekiel 17, that vine bringing forth branches and sprigs is referring on to us basically populating our offspring. All right. Verse 7, it says, there was also another great eagle with great wings and many feathers. Don't be deceived. This other great eagle is still talking about the same eagle, Esau, Edom. An example is, let's go to the book of Revelation, the 13th chapter, and we'll start at the top. When you go to Revelation 13:1, it says, and this is the Apostle John speaking, he said, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, because he was on the island of Patmos. It says, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Now the beast that John saw, we know that that first beast was the ancient pagan Roman Empire. Okay, but notice the ancient pagan Roman Empire, who were the Romans? They were Edomites. Okay, now when you jump down to verse 11, John says what? And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Now we know that that other beast eventually or ultimately is what? NATO and the EU, but it's still the same beast, because it's still the same devil, Esau, Edom. It's just different time periods and going by different names, but it's still the same beast. So John said he saw another beast, but it was really the same beast coming back. All right. So when you go back to Ezekiel 17, there's another great eagle that Ezekiel mentions is still talking about the same eagle. All right. It says, with great wings and many feathers, and behold, this vine did bend her roots toward him, and shot forth her branches toward him, that he might water it by the furrows of her plantation. All right. And why is that? Because we had to go to Esau. Man, let me just get it from the scriptures. Okay. Because being brought here in slavery in order to, in order to survive, what do we have to do? Deuteronomy 28 and verse 48, it says, therefore thou shalt serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee. And who's our number one enemy in this time? Esau, Edom. It says, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. So in order for us to, like it says, in want of all things, we will serve our enemies. So that's why it says here that what? The vine, which is Israel, did bend her roots toward him. All right. Because we had to what? We had to serve Esau in order to gain anything. All right. In order to survive. And shot forth her branches toward him, that he might water it by the furrows of her plantation. Okay. Now, when you go into the book of Revelation, once again, all right. Because the reason there's you can get these precepts is because it's prophecy. Now, these prophecies weren't written only once. You had different prophets that had different visions, but they still represented the same thing. All right, so going to Revelation chapter 12, verse 14, it says, actually, let me see. Okay, Revelation 12 and 14. It says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of an eagle, and that woman is Israel. And the wings represent the Lord allowing us to be swift in us escaping, because Revelation 12 and 14 is talking about when we fled from Roman persecution. All right, really predominantly around the time of the siege of Jerusalem. Okay, during that period of the Roman Jewish wars, Yahushua warned us to what? To flee when we see those Roman armies. So it says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, which is America, Salakia, which is Africa. All right, the interiors of Africa, that's the wilderness. Into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. Now, the wilderness is Africa. Into her place is America. Okay, don't confuse the two. The wilderness is Africa, but the place where she is nourished is America. And notice it says what? Where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. Who is the serpent? Esau, Edom. All right. And what does it mean by nourished? When you look up the word, it means what? To support or to assist. So going back to Ezekiel 17, verse 7, it says what? We bended, or the vine bended her roots toward him and shot forth her branches toward him that he might water it by the furrows of her plantation. That what? That nourishment. Okay. You have to obey Esau. You have to serve him to an extent. All right. Follow what he says in order for you to get the different benefits that you need to hang on. All right. Verse 8, it was planted in a good soil by great waters, that it might bring forth branches, and that it might bear fruit, and that it might be a goodly vine. All right, and that was basically us being brought here. Okay, but it says, verse 9, say thou, thus saith the Lord power, shall it prosper? Shall he not pull up the roots thereof, and cut off the fruit thereof, that it wither? It shall wither in all the leaves of her spring, even without great power or many people to pluck it up by the roots thereof. So Ezekiel is saying here, looking at Israel's condition, all right, with the hell and the hellish conditions that we were in, and we were made to serve, the harsh bondage in which we were made to serve. Shall we prosper? Shall we live? Okay. Aren't we going to be destroyed? You look at Jake. Are we ever going to come into power, or are we always going to stay a low vine? All right, that's what it's talking about in verse 9. And verse 10, it says, yea, behold, being planted, shall it prosper? So we were brought here, but are we ever going to come into power? It says, shall it not utterly wither? You see the conditions Jake are in right now. Aren't we ultimately just going to stay niggas and spick and stay on the bottom and ultimately just perish away? When the east wind toucheth it, it shall wither in the furrows where it grew. So it looks like we ain't never going to make it out of this low condition. And we're just going to die as a bunch of just, people who got brought here on cargo slave ships, a bunch of niggas. All right. And that's why when you go into the book of Malachi, all right, that's why this statement was made here. All right, give me 1 second while I get it. All right, this is the book of Malachi, chapter 3. No, not 3. Chapter 1, verse 1. It says, the burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. Verse 2, I have loved you, saith the Lord, yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother? So the Lord said he loved us, but you, like the response says, wherein hast thou loved us? Because you look at the conditions we're living in now, the conditions we were brought here in, the state that Israel is in. That's like the question Israel is asking. Well, wherein have you loved us? Oh, everything we're going through is catching hell. So you're saying you love us, but where's the hell? I mean, where's the love? All we going through is affliction. All right. It says, and then the Lord says, was not Esau Jacob's brother, right? Saith the Lord, yet I loved Jacob and I hated Esau. And then, it goes in on that. So the Lord's saying, look, you saying all this, but when all is said and done, really technically Esau was supposed to get that blessing and that birthright. But what? I chose you over him. You could have been, the Lord could have had to say, we would have been the one serving Esau. Esau would have been the son and the child and the seed of God and the promise and all that. But that's not how it went. All right. So now going back to Ezekiel 17, continuing at verse 11, it says, moreover, the word of the Lord came on to me saying. Now, verse 12, like I mentioned earlier, it's both prophetic, all right, and it's historical. All right. It's twofold. Now, when you read verse 12, this actually happened historically, all right? It says, say now to the rebellious house, which we know the rebellious house is Israel, but at the time, this was actually the southern kingdom, okay? Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. It says, know ye not what these things mean? Tell them, behold, the king of Babylon has come to Jerusalem, all right? Now, at that time, the king of Babylon that came to Jerusalem was Nebuchadnezzar II, okay? Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar, the one we know about, we read about in the book of Daniel, that was the king of Babylon that came to Jerusalem, and he actually came to Jerusalem. It says, and hath taken the king thereof, and the princes thereof, and led them with him to Babylon. And the king at the time was Jeconiah. Okay, King Jeconiah. All right, that was the king that Nebuchadnezzar took. When you read into the secular history, Nebuchadnezzar came there. All right, this was before he actually had that siege and razed and destroyed Jerusalem. He came there. He took away Jeconiah amongst, some of the royalties and the carpenters and so on and so forth, and took them to Babylon. All right. So it says here, it's come to Jerusalem and hath taken the king thereof and the princes thereof. When you read in Daniel, he was a part of those princes. Him, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Why do you think they took them? Because what? They were of royal seed. Okay, so they took them to train them and to use them in Babylon. It says and led them with him to Babylon. Okay, now this actually happened. Okay, and we can read about that. Let me just find the verse. There's the book of Jeremiah. Salakia. All right. There's the book of Jeremiah, chapter 24, verse 1. It says, the Lord showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs were set before the temple of the Lord. After that, Nebuchadrezzar, which sometimes the scriptures call him that, all right, and sometimes they'll call him Nebuchadnezzar, but it's the same person. So it says, Nebuchadrezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the princes of Judah with the carpenters and the smiths from Jerusalem, and had brought them to Babylon. So when you go into Ezekiel 17, all right, and verse 12, it says here, behold, the king of Babylon is come to Jerusalem, and have taken the king thereof, and the princes thereof, and led them with him to Babylon. Historically, that king that was taken was Jeconiah, all right, along with the princes and so on and so forth that we just read. All right. Now, prophetically, verse 12, that rebellious house is the nation of Israel. Okay. And the king of Babylon here is Esau. Okay. Now, he came to Jerusalem, but he really came to wherever Jake was dwelling at. All right. And dealing with the southern kingdom, he came to what? The western coast of Africa. Okay. And what did he do? He took us. All right. He took us and our kings and our, because we still had that royal line and succession going on. He took us and our kings and princes, and what did he do? It says here, and have led them with him to Babylon. And the modern day Babylon is America. He brought us here to America. Okay. Now let me get a quick precept on that. That's what? Deuteronomy 28 and 68. All right. Also, the book of Amos. Bear with me 1 second. Amos chapter 1, verse 15. It says here, and their king shall go into captivity, and his princes together, saith the Lord. Okay, so nobody escaped that. It happened back then, but it also happened again, all right, through prophecy. Okay, so going back to Ezekiel 17, continuing at verse 13. Now, from verse 13 on down to around the 19th, 20th verse, that is actual history. All right. It says here, and have taken the king's seed and made a covenant with him. Now, in verse 12, it said that what? He took the king, okay? He took the king and he took the princes thereof and led them to Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar actually did that. But verse 13 says, and have taken the king's seed. Now, when you go into Israel, you had Josiah, and you had his son Jehoiakim, and then you also had Zedekiah, okay, or Mattaniah. Mattaniah was his actual name, but when Nebuchadnezzar made him king, that was the throne name he gave him, Zedekiah. Okay, so you had King Josiah, and then you had Jehoiakim, and then you had Jehoiakim's brother, Mattaniah or Zedekiah, okay? And then you had Jehoiakim's son, which was Jeconiah. That was the king at the time that the king of Babylon or Nebuchadnezzar took with him to Babylon. So when he took Jeconiah to Babylon, what did he do? He set up Jeconiah's uncle, all right? which would be of the seed of the king, because Zedekiah was the son of Josiah. Okay, so it says, ye have taken the king's seed, because Zedekiah was still of royal line. All right, it says, ye have taken the king's seed and made a covenant with him, because he set up Zedekiah as a puppet king, who was what? To pay tribute to Babylon, but what was to sort of be like a vassal ruler. It says, and have made a covenant with him, and have taken an oath of him. He hath also taken the mighty of the land. So that's when the book of Nebuchadnezzar did. He came there, he took the current king, Jeconiah, he took him out, took him to Babylon. All right, and then he set up his uncle, which was Zedekiah, the last king, all right, of the southern kingdom before Jerusalem got, clipped. All right. Now, that's verse 13. Okay, and the precept for that, 2 Kings 24 and 20. All right. This is the book of 2 Kings, chapter 24, verse 20. Let me see. I'll start at 15. It says, and he carried away Jehoiakim, and this is talking about let me see. Okay, I'll start at verse 11. All right. And this is the history of what we just read in Ezekiel 17. So it says, 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 11. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his princes and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he and that's actually Jeconiah, all right, or Conai. It says, and he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the house of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. Now this wasn't, he didn't destroy, all right. He didn't, Salakia, I had this thing off so I couldn't see the comments, but hey, shalom to those watching, by the way. And Thawada walked circumspectly 144 for putting the precept that I was looking for in there. All right. But yeah, at this time, Nebuchadnezzar hadn't destroyed the temple just yet. Okay. Because there was multiple visits of the Babylonians to Jerusalem before it got destroyed. Okay. So we're reading about it here. Verse 14, and he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor. Okay, let's go back to Ezekiel 17, verse 13. And have taken of the king's seed, and made a covenant with him, and have taken an oath of him. He hath also taken the mighty of the land. All right, which wasn't just the mighty men, but it was also the carpenters and those that kept things moving, like society running, all right, in Jerusalem. Continuing, verse 14, it says, the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths, none remained save the poorest sort of the people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land, those carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of might, even 7,000, and the craftsmen and smiths 1,000, all that were strong and apt for war, even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, his father's brother, king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. The king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, took Mattaniah, which was Jeconiah's father's brother, because Jeconiah's father was Jehoiakim, and his brother was Mattaniah. Those two brothers, their father was Josiah. Okay, so the king of Babylon took Jeconiah, all right, and then made his father's brother, or his uncle, which was Mattaniah, the king, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Okay, so that's what we just read about. Now let's go back to Ezekiel 17, continuing at verse 14. It says, that the kingdom might be base. Why? Because now it didn't have the carpenters and the smiths and you know, all the people that were like it says, all that were left were the poorest of the poorest sort. Those are the only people that Nebuchadnezzar really left there. All right. Verse 14, that the kingdom might be base, that it might not lift itself up, because at that point we couldn't do anything. All right. Well, we were under control of the Babylonians. And he made sure of that so that we wouldn't be able to, we didn't have craftsmen. Who was going to make our weapons? You know, who was going to, you know, fortify the wall, all these different things. It says that the kingdom might be base, that it might not lift itself up, but that by keeping of his covenant it might stand. So long as Zedekiah had Israel paying tribute onto the Babylonians, we would be good, basically. All right. Verse 15, but he rebelled against him in sending his ambassadors into Egypt, that they might give him horses and much people. Shall he prosper? Shall he escape that doeth such things? Or shall he break the covenant and be delivered? So who rebelled? Zedekiah. That's how we ended up. That's really what brought on the siege of Jerusalem, and where the Babylonians destroyed the temple and set it on fire and all of that. It was because Zedekiah rebelled. Now, Jeremiah was warning him, right? Jeremiah told him, look, the Babylonians are coming, but when they come, don't try to fight them. All right. If you don't fight them, you're going to be good. You try to fight them, well, you know what I'm saying? That ain't going to end right. But did Zedekiah listen? Well, we know now that he didn't. So it says here in verse 15, but he rebelled against them in sending his ambassadors into Egypt. Okay. Now I got the precepts written here, because there's a lot of precepts to remember, but this was Jeremiah. Let's get that real quick. Chapter 52. Verse 11. Actually, hold on. Let's go up a bit. Jeremiah chapter 52. We could start at verse 3. It says, for through the anger of the Lord it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, till he had cast them out of his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. All right. And what did he do? He actually sent messages to Egypt, and I believe the king at the time was the king damn, what's his name? I think it starts with an H. Hophra. All right. Something along those lines. But he was the king of Egypt, and Zedekiah basically sent you know, messages there like, yo, you know, hook us up and so on and so forth. All right. You know, basically, yo, pull up and let's rebel against Babylon, which was the wrong move. All right. Zedekiah he should not have done that. Okay. But hey, really, according to prophecy, it was the right move. All right. Because, you know, the Lord had it to where Jerusalem was still going to be destroyed either way. All right. That's just the way it went down. All right. All right. This is the book of Jeremiah chapter 37. Verse 3. All right, it says here, and Zedekiah the king sent Jehoiakim, the son of Shelemiah, and Zephaniah the son of Maaseiah, the priest, to the prophet Jeremiah, saying, pray now unto the Lord our God for us. Now Jeremiah came in and went out among the people, for they had not put him into prison. Then Pharaoh's army was come forth out of Egypt, and when the Chaldeans that besieged Jerusalem heard tidings of them, they departed from Jerusalem. Then the word of the Lord came unto the prophet Jeremiah, saying, thus saith the Lord God, thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, thus shall ye say to the king of Judah, that sent you unto me to inquire of me, behold, Pharaoh's army, which is come forth to help you, shall return to Egypt into their own land, and the Chaldeans, which are the Babylonians, shall come again and fight against this city and take it and burn it with fire. Thus saith the Lord, deceive not yourselves, saying, the Chaldeans shall surely depart from us, for they shall not depart. For though ye had smitten the whole army of the Chaldeans that fight against you, and there remained but wounded men among them, yet should they rise up every man in his tent, and burn the city with fire. And it came to pass that when the army of the Chaldeans was broken up from Jerusalem for fear of Pharaoh's army, all right, because what happened? For a moment, the Egyptians were able to drive back some of the those Babylonian forces, but the Lord told Jeremiah to tell Zedekiah, look, this is not going to be a thing. Don't think you can rely on these Egyptians, because when the time comes, they ain't going to be able to help you against the Babylonians. And that's why when we go back to Ezekiel 17, it says here in verse 16 or verse 15, but he rebelled against him in sending ambassadors into Egypt. And that was Zedekiah. He rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. It says that he might give him horses and much people, which we just read that. Shall he prosper? Is Zedekiah going to prosper in this act? Shall he escape that doeth such things? Or shall he break the covenant and be delivered? So is he going to succeed? Verse 16, as I live, saith the Lord, surely in the place where the king dwelleth that made him king. All right. So surely in the place where the king dwelleth that made Zedekiah king. Who was the king? Nebuchadnezzar. Where did he dwell? Babylon. So what it's saying here is surely in Babylon, all right, it says, continuing, whose oath he despised and whose covenant he brake, even with him in the midst of Babylon shall he die. So I'm going to read it again slow, and I'm going to break it down. It says, as I live, saith the Lord God, surely in the place where the king dwelleth that made him king, so surely in Babylon, where Nebuchadnezzar dwells that made Zedekiah king, okay, whose oath he despised, the oath between them two, all right, that Zedekiah despised, and whose covenant he brake, because Zedekiah rebelled, even with him, even with Nebuchadnezzar, in the midst of Babylon, he shall die. Zedekiah shall die. And Zedekiah actually did die, all right, in Babylon. Okay, let me see that. Jeremiah, I think that was the one I was trying to get in Jeremiah. What's that, 52? Jeremiah 52 and 11, it says, I start at verse 10. I start at verse 9. And they took the king, which is Zedekiah, and carried him unto the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, in Riblah, in the land of Hamath, where he gave judgment upon him. And the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. He slew also the princes of Judah in Riblah. Then he put out the eyes of Zedekiah, so he took his eyes out. And the king of Babylon bound him in chains and carried him to Babylon and put him in prison till the day of his death. We just read that. All right, let's keep going. Verse 17, neither shall Pharaoh with his army and the great company make for him in the war by casting up mounts and building forts to cut off many persons. Like we just read, what happened? The Lord said it, and when the about what? Pharaoh not or the Egyptians not being able to help Israel against the Babylonians. Verse 18, seeing he despised the oath by breaking the covenant, when lo, he had given his hand and have done all these things, he shall not escape. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, as I live, surely mine oath that he have despised and my covenant that he hath broken, even it will I recompense upon his own head. Now, once again, going back to prophecy, this happened to us. Deuteronomy 28 and 15. That what? If we didn't, basically, because we broke the first covenant, which is why there's why the Lord had to make another covenant that we're going to enter into. But that's how we ended up in these curses. So verse 19, therefore thus saith the Lord, as I live, surely mine oath that he have despised and my covenant that he hath broken. Who's the he? Us. Okay. And we broke the Lord's covenant. Even it will I recompense upon his own head. And that's why we in here now. All right. Verse, recompense upon his own head. All these curses. Deuteronomy 28 and 68 coming here on slave ships. All right. Amongst many others. Verse 20, and I will spread my net upon him, and he shall be taken in my snare, and I will bring him to Babylon, and will plead with him there for his trespass, and that he hath trespassed against me. And what happened? Were we not caught as if caught in the net and brought here to America? Okay. And how is the Lord pleading with us here? Well, this by way of the prophets. Okay. Isaiah chapter 58 verse 1. Cry aloud, spare not. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions, and the house of Jacob their sins. So that's how the Lord is pleading with Israel here in America through us, through the prophets, calling out and telling you what? To repent and to get right. Okay. Also in the book of Proverbs. Hold on one second. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 24, it says, because I have called and ye refused, I have stretched out mine hand and no man regarded. But ye have set at naught all my counsel and were none of my reproof. So that the Lord is what? How did the Lord call and you refuse? And how did he stretch out his hand? Through the prophets. And what is that a form of? That's a form of pleading with you. There's a scripture that the Lord said, basically he's calling Israel to come and let's talk, and he's basically saying, if there's anything that I've done wrong, let me know, and then, if only you repent, all right, I'll make your sins, which are crimson or scarlet red, white as snow. That's what the Lord pleading with us. Okay. Carrying on. Verse 21, and all his fugitives with all his bands shall fall by the sword, and they that remain shall be scattered toward all winds, and ye shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it. Okay, so who is that? Who were scattered throughout the four winds? Was that not us? Okay, you had in the process of that, you had a lot of Israelites that were killed. Okay, and some of them were caught. And when you go into the time of the transatlantic slave trade, what we were caught, and not only the bulk of us were brought to America, but we were also sent to different parts, Spain, Europe, different parts of the world. Okay. Which when you go to Deuteronomy 20, let's just go to it. All right. This is the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 64. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods which thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. So what? We were going to be scattered from one end of the earth even unto the other, as we just read. All right. Verse 22, thus saith the Lord God, I will also take of the highest branch of the high cedar, and will set it, I will crop off from the top of his young twigs a tender one, and will plant it upon a high mountain and eminent. So now this is going into the Lord having mercy on us and turning our captivity and Israel coming back into power. So like he said, I will take of the highest branch of the high cedar. Now, when you go into the beginning, what did it say here? Ezekiel 17:3, and say, thus saith the Lord, a great eagle with great wings, long winged, full of feathers, which had diverse colors, which is Esau, came onto Lebanon and took what? The highest branch of the cedar. So going back to Revelation 20, Ezekiel 17:22, the Lord said he's gonna what? Take also of the highest branch of the high cedar, and will set it, all right, and will crop off from the top of his young twigs a tender one, and will plant it upon a high mountain and eminent. Now, what do we know about when Israel comes back into power? It's not going to be the whole nation. All right, that's why he says he's going to crop off from the top of his young twigs a tender one. All right, going into that remnant, because that's how with us coming back into power is going to start, with that remnant, with that elect. They're the ones who are going to be planted upon the high mountain, and then through them, the whole nation is gonna gain that salvation, or is gonna come out. All right. Which this is in the book of Isaiah. All right. Notice it says what? I will plant them upon a high mountain and eminent. Okay. So now let's go to the book of Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 2. It says, well, actually, I'll start at verse 1. The word that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of all, or in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all the nations shall flow onto it. And that mountain represents the government. All right, so the government of Israel is going to be above all governments, and everybody's going to flow onto it. All right, so like it says here, that what he will, the Lord will plant it upon a high mountain and eminent. Verse 3, in the mountain of the height of Israel will I plant it, and it shall bring forth boughs, which we went into that, going into sons, and bear fruit, and be a goodly cedar. All right, going into what? We're going to, the scriptures say, one shall be as a nation. Okay, and then the scriptures say what? Be fruitful and multiply. All right. It says, and under it shall dwell all fowl of every wing, in the shadow of the branches thereof shall they dwell. And the fowls of every wing are going into these other nations, okay, because they're going to be under us. That's why it says under it shall dwell all fowl of every wing. Okay, now back in Isaiah 2:2, it says at the last part, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. Okay. Verse 24, last verse. And all the trees of the field shall know that I, the Lord, have brought down the high tree, all right, which the high tree was Esau, okay, have exalted, and specifically Babylon, because that's going to get destroyed. But that, what does the destruction of Babylon symbolize? It symbolizes the downfall of Esau, okay? It says, have brought down the high tree and have exalted the low tree. And who's the low tree? Us, Israel. Because when we read in the beginning, it says what? Ezekiel 17 and 6. And it grew and became a spreading vine of low stature. Okay. So I have brought down the high tree and have exalted the low tree, have dried up the green tree, which once again is Esau, but also America, because when we went into the beginning, it likened America, or it said America was what? A fruitful field. All right. And here now it's calling it a green tree. Okay. But it's going through Esau going down and Israel coming up. So it says here, and have dried up the green tree and have made the dry tree to flourish. Who is the dry tree? Israel. I, the Lord, have spoken it and have done it. Okay. And yes, the Lord has spoken it and he will do it. Okay. Now let's get a couple precepts on that. Book of Daniel. Actually, it should be here. This is the book of Daniel, chapter 2, and I'm gonna go right to the point. Verse 44. It says, and in the days of these kings shall the power of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms and shall stand forever. And that's the Lord, basically raising up that low tree and that dry tree. All right. And lastly, all right, I'm gonna close it out with this precept here in the book of Isaiah, chapter 66, verse 10. It says, rejoice ye with Jerusalem and be glad with her, all ye that love her. Rejoice for joy with her, all ye that mourn for her. And be satisfied with the breast of her consolation, that ye may milk out and be delighted with the abundance of her glory. For thus saith the Lord, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the Gentiles like a flowing stream. Then shall ye suck, ye shall be borne upon her sides, and be dangled upon her knees, as one whom his mother comforteth. So will I comfort you, and ye shall be comforted in Jerusalem. Going into that low tree, the Lord raising up, exalting that low tree. Okay. It says, verse 14, and when ye see this, your heart shall rejoice, and your bones shall flourish like an herb. All right. And the hand of the Lord shall be known toward his servants, and his indignation toward his enemies. I have brought down that high tree, and I have exalted the low tree. Okay, and that pretty much ends that. All right, in the book of Ezekiel chapter 17. Okay, going into the eagle. All right, and the vine, the eagle being Esau, the vine being Israel. Okay, but like I said, you know, that's the nature of these scriptures. That's why you got to have the spirit to understand it, because certain precepts, that's why these historians get stuck at a certain area, because they don't understand prophecy. All right, now they starting to come along now, because the videos we putting up, the elders are putting up, so on and so forth. All right, but it takes an actual spirit pursuant to Amos 3 and 7 for you to know, okay, this is prophetic, or this is that, and this, that, and the third. And ultimately, that's why we have teachers. Okay, because you ain't just gonna wake up one day and boom, wow, all right, yep, Isaiah 40. Oh, okay, got it. That's what it means. That's not how it works. The Lord reviews it, okay, and it sets up teachers so that you can learn. Okay, that's the order of things. But anyway, I'm gonna end it off there. Lord willing, you were edified. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachak Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.